Hi, Kaede, you can start.
All right, all right. Yeah, good evening, everybody. Uh, my name is Uncle Abe. I've been taking callbacks, promises, and asynchronous operations with JavaScript. Basically, JavaScript default mode. Uh, okay. JavaScript operates synchronously. That means it operates from top to bottom. For example, a synchronous operation uh, is a kind of operation that will have to wait for the list of functions to execute one after one another. For example, let's give a real life example. I know most of us have been to a toll gate before, and you know how long the queue of a toll gate can be. So, uh, a toll gate system is an example of a synchronous operation because if a car is coming to the toll booth, he has to pay, they have to give him change, everything has to be done before the next car comes in. So that's an example, and then until all the cars has been, all the toll has been collected from all the cars or vehicles. So that is a perfect example of an async operation, of a synchronous operation. So synchronous operation in Java entail every step of operation to wait for the previous step to execute completely. This means that operation in JavaScript are traditionally synchronous. For instance, a farming operation. For example, if you are trying to farm, first of all, although there are initial things that you do in farming, maybe soil preparation, I just pick the core of farming operation, which is to plant corn, then to water plants and add fertilizer. So if you do this in our console, but first of all, I want you guys to let me escape this. I want you guys to register on repo.com because we'll be using repos for all our code running. I think you used it in the last class, repo.com. So just sign in with repo.it. Then you guys will do yeah, just create a language. You can click on Node.js, then just create a new repo for you to be where I am currently. So it will boot up the the terminal and the editor. So here, if you do console log hello, then you run it, you will see it in your console, something like this. So I urge everybody to practice along with repo.com. Although this is not it's not like I'm gatekeeping. It's just that it afford opportunity of running the code side by side. If you have VS Code, you can use it. So far, you have installed Node.js, and I think those has been covered in the last class. But for people that this is their first class, you can get Node.js from uh, I think nodejs.dev. So you can get Node.js, install the compiler, load this long time supports. Once you install it, it has different, you can install with Windows, Mac, or Linux. So you should follow the documentation to install it. That's if you are using a VS Code or but I'll recommend you to use. There are other options. You can use Code Sandbox, Code Pen, Glitch to run it too. so that you not say that it's because it's repo, you'll be using repo forever. There are a lot of options. Then if you want to write the code yourself, you can use VS Code. Then VS Code, make sure you have Node.js, then you'll be able to just run your code. So let me go back to the slide. Then yeah, so let me just present. So as I was talking, a synchronous operation operates this way. It executes step by step. For example, the first operation here is console.log plant con. The next one is console.log water plants. And the last one is console.log add fertilizer. If you put it in our console, or if you run the code, you will get this particular results. Plant corn, water plant, add fertilizer. You will see that everything executes step by step. So that's synchronous operation. We can actually try it with this. If you come to our repo, we can do that. We can also log plant corn. Then I can just do this. Sorry. So we can do something like add water, then add fertilizer, just to show you how synchronous operation works. You can see that it executes like this: plant corn, add water, then add fertilizer. But sometimes, if you check this operation with real life, you will discover that although we had corn, although we add water and add fertilizer, but sometimes we add water, we continuously add water until we are done. That means this particular operation might not be executable with synchronous operation. You might want to delay this add water until we have added enough water for our soil. Then add fertilizer can operate alongside this add water. So what I just explained, that is an asynchronous operation. An asynchronous operation, for example, let's say we want to delay that this particular operation by 5 seconds, add water by 5 seconds. You will discover that uh, we cannot really do it with synchronous operation. That means that we need to have some form of an operation that will wait until we are able to execute the our current operation, the current step. So let me just okay. So the above slide might not always be the case. Truly, what if we want to delay the second operation for 5 seconds while executing the next operation? So that is where asynchronous operation comes in. It helps delay the execution of an operation until it has been resolved or rejected. Now, you might be wondering, like, synchronous, asynchronous, what's the difference? Remember that I gave you a real life scenario that uh, a synchronous operation might happen in a kind of a toll system whereby a car has to be like pay, collect change, then it moves. But in an asynchronous operation, a real life example of it will be in a restaurant. Imagine, I know we all love food. So imagine we are at like KFC, we make an order. The waiter comes to get our order. Then let's say we order for maybe chicken and chips. Then the waiter takes the order to the kitchen. He gives the cook or the chef, in any case, the chef starts maybe do start the cooking or microwaving the food. But that does not stop the waiter from taking another order, another person's order. For example, let's say we have 5 people that are in the restaurant. The the waiter will take my order to the kitchen, take another person to the kitchen until he has taken all the orders. Then, when the chef is done, is either they will tell me that, oh, this food is ready. Then they will serve me my food, or they will tell me that, oh, Oga, sorry, oh, we didn't have salt, or an error in the this thing. Then, sorry, you will not be able to serve your food. Can you order for another thing? Or so that is the perfect example of an asynchronous operation in a restaurant system whereby you make an order, the waiter takes the order to the chef, then the waiter return back to like, oh, tell you that, oh, your food is ready, or there is something wrong with your food. So that is a perfect example. But that does not take, like, unlike synchronous operation that it has to wait no matter how long it takes for the next operation to execute. So a synchronous operation, you might look at, oh, why do we use asynchronous operation in Node.js? And however, everything we are talking about here can be used with JavaScript, because Node.js is basically JavaScript. It's just an engine that we use in running JavaScript for us to run our JavaScript in the terminal, like browser. Even Node.js was built with the same engine that they used to build Chrome, Google Chrome. So it's not like it's a V8 engine, it's still JavaScript. So when do we now make asynchronous operation in JavaScript? We can make asynchronous operation when we are waiting, when making a call to an API service. For example, Google Map, a payment gateway, let's say we are sending email, we need to be able to like tell our operation to wait before then get a result, like, oh, has it been resolved? Is it successful? Does it fail? If it's successful, what we return something. If it fails, we return something. Especially when making calls to database, there is no way you make calls to your database without using an asynchronous operation. Although they will still explain how database works and why, but you need to know that when making it's important to use asynchronous operation when making a calls to your database. For example, if you are using something like Mongoose, or if you want to add something to the to your database, you have to weigh that. Is it successful? You don't just add, then you call the next operation. You have to weigh that. Oh, is this thing a success? Then if it's a success, it should return something. Then if it's a failure, you should call something that to notify your user that, oh, maybe there is a problem adding something to your database. So all database operation, yeah, it involves async. Then we use async operation for event listener. So people with vanilla JavaScript experience, people that operate HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, if you've ever transversed your DOM with event listener, maybe on all these event listener, something to unload, window, on click, on change, all those, they are async operation. Then the set timer and set interval operations they are also async operation. I know we are doing a lot of slides. I just want us to get the core concept before we go into code. We'll still go into the code. Then ways of making an asynchronous calls in JavaScript. Uh, we can make asynchronous calls in JavaScript using callback function. I will explain that later. Then we can make asynchronous calls using promises. Then we can make asynchronous calls in JavaScript maybe using async await. Although async promises and async await, they are like I don't want to say sugar and saccharin. Then we can use sugar and saccharin. It's just they are almost the same thing because they basically do the same thing. So what are callback functions? Callback function is a function that is passed into another function as an argument. You might say, oh, this is confusing, but I promise you we'll have an example of callback function, and it's expected to execute after some kind of event. Callback function is used in an argument in array method. If your this replacement of your JavaScript is okay, if you know your array method, something like map, yes, sort, reduce, filter, find index, you find yourself using the callback functions. You might just not know that you are using a callback function. So we use callback function in arguments for array methods. Then we also use our callback function in a set interval and set timeouts, and also when having event lister to our DOM. We covered that. If you want to use an event lister with JavaScript, you do some form of callback function. I might show you this if time permits us. The next type of asynchronous operation is promises. There is this joke that if they say, oh, define promise, you might say, oh, I promise to do this whenever that is true. If it isn't true, then I won't. Although you might look at, oh, this particular statement, it looks like, I promise to do this whenever that is true. If it isn't true, I won't. This looks like an if operation, but it's not. Trust me, it's not an if operation. There are difference between a promise and an if operation. I will show you that in the example. So with promises, we can defer execution of a code until async request is completed. This way, other operation can keep running without interruption. For example, let's say you have API with more than 10 endpoints, and those endpoints interact with database. You can, while making a call to this other operation, because Node.js is a single threaded, I urge you to read about single threading concepts in JavaScript. That will help you a lot in understanding how Node.js work. Maybe I will drop a link to that after the call. So because JavaScript is single threaded, that's why the default is a synchronous operation. But with promises, we can use promises to like delay or defer execution of a code until it is completed or it has been resolved or rejected. Then other operation can now keep running alongside with it without interruption. Unlike synchronous operation, why the operation have to wait until it is done before it now execute the next operation. Promises allow us to like run our concurrently. So what are the states of promises? Our promises have three states. It has a pending state like an initial state before an operation begins. It has fulfilled, then it has rejected. Fulfilled state is just a state where, oh, the operation is completed and it's successful. And rejected, just like the name, that means the operation did not complete. Then maybe an error is thrown. But we'll show that. Then async await. Async await is like a synthetic, like I said, a synthetic sugar of over promises. It's just a fine way of modification of writing say, a promise syntax. If you are familiar with promises, using async await will make like it makes things easier. So so an async array return a promise if the function returns a value, that means the promise is resolved. But if the function throws an error, that means the promise is rejected. Await is only used with async function. Even if you are familiar with use of ASLint or all those linters, it will throw a lot of blobber at you that Alaye, calm down. You can't use await outside of an async function. That's like a key has like a key, that is a key rule or a golden rule. Await is only used inside an async function. Then await keyword is used in an async function to ensure that all promises returned in an async are synchronized. That means that they wait for each other. I will show you an example here, and I think, yeah. So let's quickly, even the talk is boring me, all these slides. Let's quickly go back into our code and let's test it out one by one. So here I will, so let me just comment it out because I might share this after the class. So let's say this is a synchronous operation. So sorry, let me quickly reload this because when I just have to reload. So we have this, let me just call it a synchronous operation. Then let's start with callbacks. So what are callbacks? Like I said, callback function are functions that takes another function as an argument. You cannot use callback function outside the function. That means that if you have, even if it's name, if it's a name callback function, which I will still get into, cannot use it outside a callback function. So a perfect example of this callback function will be, uh, so let me comment out this. So a perfect example of a callback function is when you are using, let's say we have a list of soup. I know we all like food, I do. So, so let's say I have an array of soups. Ofe, salad, what's called this? Choose my list, please. So I have ofe, salad. Sorry for to my Igbo brothers that are murdering your language, but I like the soup. So we have banga, we have egusi soup, we have different efo. As a Yoruba boy, trust me, I love my efo. Then say I love my gbegiri too as an Ibadan boy. So we can look through this array using a map. They have a callback function. So let's do that. So let's do this list.map. Then we now create a callback function. So this callback function can either be, by the way, there are different type of function. Let me quickly list that. You can have a function like this, say function A. So you pass the argument like this. Then you can have, so this is a named function. You can have an anonymous function too. An anonymous function can be a function that does not take any name. So this is an example of an anonymous function. Then there is an IIE, is it IIE, something like that, immediate evoke function, whereby you invoke your something like this, then you call the function. So it's an IIE. I know if when you do your basic JavaScript, you understand what I'm talking about. Then you have arrow function. Right now, most people wait, I'm not gatekeeping again, but I know that most people use arrow function. But arrow function is an example of an anonymous function because it doesn't take a name. So I can actually do item, or let me just call it soup since they are soup. Then since I'm looping through it, I can say something like, since I can say console.log. So I will use a string literal to do something like this. Eba. No, I don't like eba. Let me take pounded yam. So then I can say pounded yam with. So it will look through this, then just console pounded yam with name of each soup. So if you have this list, all I have to do is just to put this like this with TypeScript. So let me run this code and let's see what happens. So can you see that in our, you can, let me try and increase this screen size so that you'll be able to see. So we have pounded yam with ofensala, pounded yam with banga, pounded yam with egusi, foriro, then gbege. I don't know who hit this last one. Maybe probably Curtis and all the other people. Sha. So moving on, this is an example of a callback function. But callback function can also be named. That means that instead of writing this anonymous function, which is an arrow function, I can say uh, function add pando or add pandadia. Then I will just take the soup as an argument. Then I can say console.log this. Then let me comment this out in case I share this so that we know. Then let me just call it callback callback example with anonymous. Don't know if I get this anonymous correctly. Anonymous functions. So you can have something like this. So let me call this callback with name function. So the name function now, let's say we have this name function here. So I can do list.map. So list.map, we take in the soup as an argument. Map, if you study map takes three arguments, you can take the distance. So here, so instead of using the this thing, I can now pass the function which is add pounded yam. So I can pass it as a function, as the argument for our function. So which is still a, so we can use this. Then let me run this code. You will see that our this thing, although it's returning, forget this unredefined because we are not really returning anything. So you see that it still does the same thing, even though this function the is outside the map. It's outside the map. So for callbacks can also be a. So we have different. I will give you as a task naming callback functions. So that's that about that. I think I can consider this. Okay. So let's quickly move into promises. So like I said, a promise helps us a lot, especially if you understand the concept of promises. Uh, your async can wait. I say your async can wait. Your asynchronous operation will be seamless. The knowledge of your asynchronous operation, it will be seamless because promises is like, let me say, the next thing after jollof rice. So promise. So let's try. Let me do something like creating a promise because we don't really have time. So let's do something like const promise is equal to new promise. So this new promise is available for us as a global variable, as a global, and you know that is a class since we are using new. I think if you get to your object-oriented programming, they will take you that. So promise takes two arguments. Like I said, I'm used to arrow functions, but you might, if you are the type that use normal anonymous function like this, is permitted to. So you should not say that maybe because I use arrow function that arrow function is the listen. So it takes two arguments. It takes resolve and reject. So let me try and do this for us to be able to see it. Then let me put this a bit since we are not really using it. Okay. So it takes resolve and reject. Uh, so let's do something. Let's say we want to go to a date, but it will be based on whether our weather is true or false. You know how rain is so predictable these days. So uh, let's first scenario, let's assume our the weather is true. So if the weather is true, that means that we have a perfect weather for a date. I know you tech guys don't date, you cannot relate, but I will still give it as an example. So we can actually say const promise is equal to new promise, which takes a callback function. For example, this is a callback function, so I forgot to mention that a callback function is used also used in promises. We'll get to that when we are using a there. That's all. So a perfect example, like you can say, oh, if weather, that means that weather is true. So you don't want to be using tautology. Normally, you should say something like this: if weather is true, but it's like weather is already. So if you do something like if weather, your truthy function will tell you, your truthy will tell you that it's true. So if weather is true, uh, we can say const date details. So our date details will be something like take an object, say it's have the name, what's the name of this restaurant, say ICM. ICM has a lot of places to go to. So the location, which is in Ikeja. Which people should pay me oh, if you go there. Or YCM should even pay me for promo. Then we can say we have a table. So let's say we book a table in one of the restaurants and it's table 5. So this is just an object that takes all this key value there. So we can actually do something like resolve date details. You know, this is an if statement. So let's have an else statement like, so the else will reject. That means that the weather is bad. That means nobody is going everywhere and everybody will remain single Pringle. So we can say, oh, let's return a new error, which returns something like bad weather. So no date. I should have an emoji here, but I'm not that wicked. So how do we now use this particular promise that we've created rather? We can use it. So let me just call this using promises. So remember that our weather is true. That's the initial condition. So we can say something like promise dot then. So if you check, like I said, you can change your promises. I think I mentioned in the slide. So you can change your promises. So this is the initial state, the promise. Then this then will give us the uh, let me go back to the slide so that we understand what I'm saying when I was explaining the stages of this particular stages of promises. Yeah. So we have pending, which is the initial state. We have fulfilled, then we have rejected. So if you come here, this then this then is like unfulfilled, as if fulfilled. So we can have then is it done or so we can say oh done as an argument. So we can console log or let's console.log. We are going on a date. Since this is like the fulfilled, unfulfilled, then we can now say, oh, on, so we can call our done here. Let's just call it, let's say done. Let's wrap it in console.log so that we'll be able to like see it. Because we are not returning anything. So the next thing is catch. So we change the catch to that. Oh, so this promise, if it fulfills, we'll go to a date. But if it throws an error, so we can have an error here. And don't mind me with, I'm not really used to putting this at the end of my, I have plenty for that, but don't be like me. So we can console log the error. Say something like error dot message. Okay. So so in order to like call this, let me wrap it in a function. So let me wrap it in a function called my date, for example. So my date will now be an anonymous function. Remember I told you anonymous function are function that does not take names. So we can do this, or we just return this. Then let me just call it here. Then let's see. Remember our first case, so that the weather is true. So let's do this. So let's run it. Let me first of all clear the console, then let's run it. Don't is not a function. Sorry. So let's clear it again, then let's run it. So we can actually say something like initially before we can see that the status was pending. Then once it is fulfilled, we have this because it's unfulfilled. This particular then is unfulfilled. Then the next promise is so far as the weather is true, it will always return this. But once we have the weather as false, it will throw this particular error. We will try that, but I want us to clean this up a bit because on a normal day, we are going on a date. We should have the location, the the name of the place, the location, then the table that has been reserved. So let's quickly turn this to a string literal. So we can say we are going on a date at, so a dollar sign and a curly brace. So our first variable will be done dot name. So we are going to a date at the name of the place, then the location. Say we do something like in Ikeja, sorry, done dot location. Then you can say something like comma we reserved table, then you just call the table. So table or say done dot table. So if you run this particular code, I think my time is gone. But let's try run it. So if you run this particular code, you will see that we have it. I don't need this console anymore. So let's run it again. So we can see that we are going on a date at ICM in Ikeja. We reserve a table 5. Reserve table 5. Can you see that because our weather is true, we are returning this? So let's have a case. Let's just change the weather to false and let's see what happens. So let me clear this and let me run this code again. Can you see? Sorry, bad weather, so no date. So this is an example of a promise. This is a perfect example of a promise. Then you can use promises. Say you are trying to like you are trying to make a call to an API, an external API. I think I should quickly do that. Let's try and use this API. I think the same placeholder. So let me try and get it the free placeholder. Let me try and get the listen. So here, so I can say promise example with API with external API. You know, we created this particular promise ourselves. So let's use an external API as an example of making a promise. So we can say, let's say an anonymous function called fetch data. So the fetch data will be an arrow function which return. So before it returns, I want to like just put the URL here as a variable because I don't want too long code. So we can say, so let's make a fetch. Although we can use Axios for people using VS Code and Node.js, once you instantiate, you can install Axios. I have it here, but just because of people, don't let us use it. So we can make a fetch here, then we can unfulfilled, can get the response, chain it to the response.json. Okay, this is a function. Then get the data from it. So the data, we also take a callback function. So so the data will take a callback function. Then we can console log data here. This CLG. So let's console log data. Then the last case is, what if it fails? Then we can catch the error. Then we just console log the error. You know, I told you that we should use promise and a synchronous operation when making a call to an API. So let's do this. So let's just run this code. Let me return it because it's good to always return your functions. So, so let's call this, let's run this, let me clear. So let's run this particular code. Fetch is not defined. Okay. So I don't know why. So I have Axios here. For people that want to install Axios, just come here and check the packages for your install packages. So if you come here, just check it out. Right now, I have Axios as a dependency, so I can use Axios. I don't actually know what's wrong, why fetch is not defined. So we can say Axios.get. Then instead of this using fetch syntax, we can do something like cut this out. Then let's run this. Let's clear this error. And let me just run it. Let me import Axios at the top. So let's run this. Let me clear this again. Hopefully, the God of JavaScript will work for us. So we have this response, which is whoops a lot. So we can actually just say something like, since it's return, we can, if you check here, we have status. So let's quickly go into the data. I think we should see the data here. So let me just destructure the data here. Then let me console it. So let me run it again. So yeah, so we have this data which is user one ID, user ID, title, then completed false because we are getting to do's. So if you do something like this to get all to do's, I think we have something like this. So it gives us a list of to do's just to show how it works. So remember that we are making a call to an external API. That is why this is unfulfilled. So let me just try and, because I know there is no to do, they don't have an endpoint called to do. So let's make a request to that. Let's try and create an error. You will see the error that, can you see, data is not defined, direction, throwing and inside the SIF without a catch block, blah, 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 blah. So this is just to show us, let me go back and run this code again. Then if you get the first to do, I'll just have only one data. So let me clear this and run. Okay, we'll get this. Because, but any error that we encounter while doing this, we just, so this is an example of using a promise with an external API. There are a list of API that we can use. We can even use that jokes, but we don't have time because I will soon round up. So let me quickly show you this example, this particular example with an async await. You remember I said async await is just like shakering, your synthetic shakering. It's just to make promise to be sweet. And you remember I told you inside here that this particular async await, we use try and catch block with it. So try and catch block. So let's quickly do that. So let's say same fetch data. Let's make it an async function. It's not really taking anything. We are just trying to like, so let's have a try block. So we have a try block here, like this. Then let's create our catch block. So the catch will throw an error. So let's console log the error here. It's CLG. So let's console log error. Lastly, let's use, is async, and I told you that you cannot use await outside of an async. So we can do something like response is equal to await Axios dot get. Same thing we did without having to put then. So we can say const URL is equal to, I think I should copy this. So let me quickly since we are making a call to the same URL. So let me do this so that's clear. So we are just pass the URL as the argument. Then let's just console console.log uh, response.data. So if you do this, we can call our function. Remember, we use async and we use await. Then we have a try catch block. Instead of having to put dot then, you just await it until it is done. If it's resolved, we'll console log the response of data. But if we encounter error while fetching this, it will just return it will throw an error. So let's call this function and let's run it. Let me clear this and let's run it. So we see that we are able to do that without having to do dot then. So personally, I use this syntax a lot. I use async await a lot when I using promises. I told you it's await is just it's promises just like promises on steroid. So that's just it. So then another thing I want to show you, this which is the last thing, is that here you can make different calls. All we just do is just await and await. So for example, I think our weather, so if I this particular weather promise, if I uncomment it and I can just say something like, oh, await console.log as const date is equal to await uh, await promise. So let me uncomment this. I'll just take what I want there. So like so far whether is true, we can say await new promise, then do this. Just throw this particular uh, excuse me. Yes. So I will not call my dates. So let me call my dates here. So you can say await my dates. Remember that, let me just change weather to be true for it to give us the distance. So instead of having to use dot then that we are using, we can say something like, oh, it will first await this, then one is done, it will run this, then we can console log. Let me just console log the date. So, but if we encounter error, any error we encounter, this will be true. So let's run it. Just to show you that it's not like once we make a call, we can, let's say we are running a Node.js, we make a call to the database, maybe we first make a get call, then maybe we are trying to update. So all we just need to do is just to await those operations. So let's run it, then let's see what happens. I think this has broken. Let me stop and let me run it again. Morning, guys. Let me try this. I don't know why it's not running. Maybe it's the network or let's run it. I think something is wrong with the network. Let me try and refresh. Hopefully, we don't lose data. But just to recap, before we run the function, synchronous operation it runs step by step as it is, just like this example. It runs step by step. Asynchronous operation allows us to wait before we run. It allows us to wait before executing. Let's say you have a delay, you want to create like a restaurant, like where your waiter will get your order, get other people's order. Then if your this thing was able to, your food is ready, give you if there is a problem, tell you that sorry, the food is not available again. Although that can be painful. So that's just how a synchronous operation works. And I think I've exhausted my time. So let's take questions now. If there are questions, Mike Shei, do you have questions?
Hi. So I
Hello.
think you can take questions in Slack.
Okay, okay. So if you have any questions, Shei will put it on the Node.js track. I will put it, then I'll be able to answer your question, whatever questions you have. So I think that should be the end. Just to recap, asynchronous operations works a lot if you are trying to make if you are trying to wait for your this thing to resolve before you call the next operation, because JavaScript is simple threaded, so it likes to run synchronously. That means that it will run step by step. Unless you use an asynchronous operation, you will not be able to run some concepts in JavaScript. I hope I've been able to explain. Then don't if you have questions after this, you can drop it inside the comment box on our Slack. I will attend to it. I think that should be the end of the class.